So we're going to have a little sidebar here so I can just run you through what we're going to do. I did film this whole thing way back before when I had the disc set aside and I hadn't made the bells and I hadn't really started very much at all yet. But my phone camera ate it. So here I am from the future to talk you through what we're going to do. Now, the issue started with these. Now you might be thinking, what's wrong with them? They're shiny, they're red, they still have the stickers from when they were bought, and they haven't even been put in a car yet. Everything's looking good so far, and I thought the same thing. See, when you look at these very closely, you'll notice these mounting holes. They look innocuous, but this is where our journey into the darkness begins. These holes look as though they're the same space apart as the ones on my upright, because they are the same space apart as the ones on my upright. But they look as though they should take the same bolt as goes into my upright. Although, in all fairness, they do take the same bolt that goes into my upright. So everything seems pretty solid so far. I actually bolted these straight up to the upright, thought, fantastic, let's get a disc on there. And that's when we found the terrible secret. These have a 6.5mm offset. Doesn't sound too bad, but it just means the caliper's set slightly further over. Normally with offset calipers like that, you get an adapter bracket that comes with it. It's normally a very heavy bit of steel with 2 bolts here to go into the upright and 2 bolts here for the caliper. Problem is they've usually got a 20mm offset or a 35mm offset or whatever. Point is, 6.5mm isn't big enough for me to drill a second hole. So we need to fix this another way. And the way Elise Parts fixed it back like 12 years ago, I think these were made, was to make an offset bell. No one at the time or anyone involved really knew this when I bought them, and I didn't spend very much money on them, so I can't complain too much. But I now need to sort out some bells and a disc that will fit it. Normally a disc kit with bells runs you many pennies, £700 to £900. These did not. These discs here are off of a touring car. They're made by AP Racing, they're fully floating, and they come off the rear end of a rear wheel drive touring car. These, after one single race, get discarded. This has done 0.1mm of wear. 0.1. They're also the exact thickness that fit my calipers. Literally, you could put these on with the standard Lotus 2 pots. They're 25.4mm normally. These ones measured in at 25.3 because it was just 1mm that was worn off it. That's basically a new disc. And they were very inexpensive. They're made by AP. They're fully floating, so they're fantastic on track. The only problem I had was mounting a bell to it. Now, I could have tried to pick up a second-hand set of AP disc bells for an Elise S1 or a VX220 because that's the uprights I'm using. But we still have the problem of the offset. And not only do we have the problem of the offset, this bit in here, the mounting points, has a unique PCD, that's just the name for the size of the circle, to these discs. 184mm instead of the more common 177 or 192, 198, 19 something, I don't know, you don't really get them on Lotuses. That means that this won't really fit anything else other than something custom made. So, all we have to do is find out the dimensions we need to make this thing, make a quick CAD model, and get it made. These are going to be fantastic on track. Like, they also weigh 2 kilos less than the standard sized VX220 disc. Not even another 304/308mm disc. Like the standard size disc, this is 2 kilos lighter than. Also, they're 304mm, which is fantastic because on the original big brake kits for the S1 Elise and the Exige, they were 304mm discs instead of the more common 308 that you now see on the S2 and S3 big brake kits. Well, maybe not the S3, that'll have something massive, but for the Elise S3, not the Exige. Anyways, I've warbled enough. Let's make some discs.
So our first job is to make up a dummy brake bell. I'm going to make mine out of MDF, medium density fiberboard, and our first step is to mark it all up for the 2 PCDs of both the hub and the bell, and then we can set about cutting out the centre spigot, drilling out the wheel stud holes, and then drilling out the holes for the actual bell to mount to. Then with that done, we can bolt it up to our upright, making sure that it fits in our wheel nut holes, and then set about mounting up the disc. Oops. So we mount the disc onto the bell, making sure that it's spaced out to the amount that we reckon it's going to need to be offset. Once that's all bolted up, we can set about mounting that onto the hub. Using a couple of placeholder bolts here just to keep it in place so that it won't move, and then we can set about getting our caliper in there. Once the two caliper bolts are in, we can see whether or not this disc is set up right and if it's going to run nice and true down the centre, which it does look like it is. There's a wee bit of wobble there just because, you know, the bell's made of wood, but this looks like it'll do the job. With that done, we can take the measurements we take off of this into a CAD program, in my case Autodesk Inventor, and knock up some nice fancy brake bells. Then of course we can look at the price of machining and how much more expensive any tool changes or fancy bits tend to make it, and come up with this nice, much simpler, much cheaper brake bell model here.
So technically speaking, we do now have a disc and a brake bell, and we're lining up nicely in the caliper and everything is suspiciously working out well. Problem is, if you put this on a car being made of high density fiberboard and hit the brakes, you'd probably stop round about the time you hit the nearest tyre wall. So we need to transfer this into a metal of some sort, such as steel, or in our case, aluminium. So I've knocked up a quick CAD model using the dimensions we took off of this, and I have used my contact, and by that I mean one of my uni pals has a 3D printer, to have this quickly printed up in PLA. Now if we bolt all of this up and this thing lines up the way it should, we know that my file is good and I can send it off for machining. 3D printing really is magic. £2 worth of filament, and it should save me the money of messing up my model, doing everything wrong, and then having to do this again. And then that kind of defeats the purpose of doing everything a bit cheaper and not just buying a set of Elise parts or Elise shop bells. So let's get this fitted up and see if it works. This actually seems to have worked out quite well, which is weirding me out because normally things don't go that smoothly here. It must be some kind of trap. But no, from what I can see, everything's lined up pretty perfectly. We're nice and close on the back of the disc to the caliper, so the pad will get the full sweep of the friction surface. We're evenly spaced out either side of the disc, although I don't know if I'll have been able to show you that in camera, because trying to get that thing to line up perfectly with the back of this was a massive pain. Everything seems fairly sorted here. The only irritating thing about the 3D printing is because it's additive manufacturing instead of cutting it away, the tolerances aren't quite as tight. As far as the machine's concerned, the centre of its nozzle is 0. However, on either side, you've got a little bit of plastic coming out as it prints. That wasn't too much of a trouble for this centre board here, I just went around it with sandpaper, but that little step there where it comes over the hub was a bit more of a pain to get into, being that it was a tiny little corner. I may actually, on my model, move that step out a little because it doesn't really make a difference to the bell, and it means if there's any inaccuracies with my aluminium bit, then I don't need to sit and try and scrape aluminium out of that to get it to fit over the hub. Other than that, we're basically back to the same place we were with that fiberboard bell, where we've got something that fits and works, but if you tried to stop with this on a car, bad things would happen. So now I just need to tweak that model, send it away, get it machined in aluminium, and then come back. In my case, that's going to take a couple of weeks. In your case, that should take, oh well, about...
I don't know about you guys, but that looks pretty good to me. They are a little silver though, so let's fire on some gloves, mix up some chemicals, and set about anodizing. The first step is an etch bath. We just dunk it in here and leave it to fizz for a little bit. After a good rinsing off, we're on to the actual anodizing bath itself. Then we feed a negative and a positive feed to it, and we leave it again to work its magic. Once that's done, it's in for yet another rinse, and we're into a dye bath. This is just black anodizing dye and a bit of warm water. Once it's out of there, we take it away to boil it to seal it, and that's our part, all nice and black and ready to go. Well, let's bust out that fancy AP hardware and assemble our discs for the final time, placing our final finished bell onto the disc and then doing each individual single bobbin and bolt one by painstaking one, giving them a quick tighten with the ratchet and then making sure to torque each one of them to spec. With that done, we can fire this onto the car, get our brake calipers tightened up at the spacing they need to be, slip a set of pads into the calipers and give everything a spin to see if it all lines up. There's a bit of brake drag, probably from the lack of anything holding it hard to the hub. But I don't know. This seems like a pretty successful project to me.
And that, more or less, is how you make a set of fully floating discs. They've actually turned out suspiciously well. I really didn't expect them to turn out this good, given that we started off with some bits of wood, some tin snips to cut the wood out, and actually no, we ended up 3D printing stuff and that. This was a pretty cool episode. This really was just meant to be a bit of filler for the start of the new series, but that kind of dragged on as that Jag took up more and more space for longer and longer, and I couldn't get my car in the garage. But this whole thing grew arms and legs, largely due to the whole floating bells thing. I'm quite happy with how the anodizing turned out. I didn't think that would have come out as good. A few of my test pieces came out with a bit of a mottled finish, but I reckon that's because I was boiling them in tap water instead of deionized water. You need to do everything with anodizing with either deionized water or reverse osmosis water. I'm not 100% sure what reverse osmosis water is. I've never seen it anywhere. I'm gonna guess it's a more American option for topping up your batteries. But these did turn out pretty good. I'm struggling to get over that, I'm not gonna lie. But we've kind of dragged on a little bit with this. Should have been done a while ago. It wasn't, but the upside is the car is now in the garage. In fact, it's just behind the camera there. So I'm going to put these bells down, put them on a shelf, and set about pulling the car apart. And then hopefully we can get some of summer in the car once it's all rebuilt. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, then feel free to join me next time.